All right, happy to have on, as we always are, Allen Trieu, 24/7 Sports National Recruiting Analyst. And we were just talking before we got on here, Allen. The calendar is pretty insane nowadays. I know you've been out on the road with a lot of these high school camps with the transfer portal, right into June, official visits here. There is no offseason for these coaches and for us covering it.
Yeah, not at all. Coaches are trying to manage this portal right now. They're all out on the road recruiting, and they're going to come back. You got official visits starting, well, in some cases already starting, and then they have their own camps. And so, yeah, this is a time of year where I think everybody's just treading water and hoping to get to July.
Well, it's a good time to catch up with you then to figure all this stuff out. But I wanted to get into the new assistant. I know you have some really insight into who Corey Parker is, but let's start there. Usually we are focused on prep visits, gearing up for all these official visits in June, which has become the big month for recruiting. But most teams, including Illinois, are really focused on the portal. Illinois has recently gotten Terrence Brooks and Gentle Hunt here on board. How has the portal impacted more your world, which is prep recruiting?
Yeah, I think it's just for us, it's more to cover, but I think it's the way in which the schools have to now differently manage their roster. It's a different way to fill needs. I think that the kind of the stereotype is that people want to say that the portal negatively affects high school recruiting. I think that there was a period of time where that may have been true. I don't think it's as much anymore. Now I think there's so many players entering the portal that teams are really using the portal to replace portal guys that they lost. And so it's less like these portal guys are taking the place of high school recruits. I think if you look around the country, most schools are going to sign full classes again. Like a lot of MAC schools signed 20 plus last year. So I think that it's not affecting high school recruiting as negatively as people might think. Now it's just like, well, we had 8 guys enter the portal. Now we need to bring in 8 guys to replace them, or we have an immediate need here. So we need to find somebody that we can plug and play. And I think where it really truly negatively affects anybody, I think it's in the lower level schools, the FCS schools and the D2 schools that are now getting rated. I think they're starting to feel like they're a farm system for the G5 and P5 schools.
Yeah, it feels different than basketball. One, because you got so many spots. You still have to prep recruit, right? Like Illinois basketball, if they want to, could probably take 1 or 2 high school kids if they want to, or none, and build a pretty good roster. It still feels like prep recruiting, developing them, whether it's 15 guys in a class or 20 guys in a class, that still feels like the lifeblood of a program.
Yeah, and I wonder in the next few years if schools will start to figure out that portal is a great place to fill an immediate need if something unfortunate happens. But I still don't think you could really build a program that way. To your point, I think you still want guys that you bring in out of high school and are able to have in your program, your strength and conditioning, and in your playbook for 3, 4, 5 years. I still think for the most part, that's what you're going to want. And so I think we'll see over the next few years if the schools sort of correct themselves as far as how many portal guys they need to take and how many they should take each year.
Well, Illinois hired Corey Parker as an assistant coach. He was a high school coach in Michigan for 13 years. For people don't know, Allen, you are situated in Michigan. That's where you live. And he spent the last 2 years as Toledo's cornerbacks coach. So you have some insight in there. What is Illinois getting in Corey Parker as an assistant coach?
Yeah, first, I mean, a guy who has an extreme, when you meet him, he's somebody who you immediately will say, like, well, he could really run for office if he wasn't in football. Like, very polished, just a really good communicator. And I think has had so much success at the prep level at a school that when he took over was not having a ton of success. Like, traditionally, that's a good program. They've produced some recruits, but he really changed it around from his first year going 2-7 to winning a state title, which is no small feat. And during that time, had to beat some really good programs in the state of Michigan, turned that place into a recruiting destination, built a lot of connections with college coaches. And it was almost like from year 3 or 4 that he was at River Rouge, people started to whisper around the state, like, when is he going to go to a college? Like, he just had that feel. And it almost felt a little bit like Corey Patterson, who I know you're familiar with. In when he was coaching high school ball, it was just like, it's a matter of time before he ends up at the college level. It's the same thing with Corey Parker. Nobody is surprised that he got a job at Toledo, and nobody is surprised that he's now in the Big Ten. There was a lot of talk about him as a Michigan State candidate for their DB jobs this year, but just a guy that is extremely personable, very put together, very knowledgeable about the game, and I think is going to be a really strong recruiter. He's got now a couple of names on his resume, including Quinion Mitchell at Toledo. That's going to help things too. And he's going to be the type of person who can go out there and communicate that and sell that.
I don't know if you talk to a lot of people about this, so I'm kind of putting you on the spot, Allen, but like obviously Quinion Mitchell is a huge notch in his belt of development there, having a first round draft pick at corner. Illinois had Devin Witherspoon a couple of years ago. So pretty good sell with him and Aaron Henry in that defensive backfield. But Toledo program a couple of years ago, like Jason Candle was like, is he going to be there long term? They have really, bounced back and obviously been one of the best programs in the MAC for several years now and go back decades. And they have been. Have you heard what his impact was in his couple of years there?
Yeah, I mean, I think for one, if you look at how they recruited the state of Michigan, there certainly was some impact there with the guys they were. Now I say that Toledo has always recruited Michigan pretty well. And so there was that, but I think had he stayed, he was going to be somebody who continued to move up the chain there. But they almost sounded in a way, like when you talk to people around the Toledo program, they knew that this day was going to come also. And they knew that there was going to be Big Ten type schools that came after him. And so he was exactly what they thought he was going to be when they hired him. And again, you made a good point there. Toledo is one of the best programs in the MAC. Jason Candle is a coach that gets talked about each year. He's on all of those candidate lists to move up to the next program. So that's a heck of it's not really a stepping stone. It isn't like Corey went to a, Division II or an NAIA school for his first college job. He jumped right into Toledo, which I think says something about him that was his first college job, was stepping right into the top of the MAC.
One thing that's been interesting is Terrence Jamison, the Illinois defensive line coach, has really started to recruit Michigan. They've gotten a couple guys out of there here recently. Jeremiah Warren, who I know you liked, and the Illinois staff is high on. Mason Moragan. They got Andrew Dennis for at least a semester, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But what do you think is the opportunity for a school like Illinois going into Michigan, where, of course, you have the Wolverines, you have Michigan State, you have Ohio State recruiting there? What do you think the opportunity for them recruiting the state with a guy like Corey now adding to Terrence Jamison?
Yeah, I think the opportunity is huge. And I think that the talent pool here is deep enough that you don't have to beat Ohio State. You don't have to beat Michigan. You don't really even have to beat Michigan State. And, the player that couple players that Corey just had drafted, Kamal Hayden and Rook or Horoho, neither of those guys really got recruited by Michigan or Michigan State or Ohio State for that matter. And when you look at some of the other programs that have had success coming in and recruiting Michigan, Purdue is one that gets guys out of here. Rutgers is another. Kansas has come in here and gotten some good players from the state of Michigan the last few years. You can find good talent in this state without having to beat Michigan State, and Ohio State. And so I think there's plenty to go. And to that point, Toledo last year, starting quarterback DeQuan Finn, state of Michigan guy ends up portaling to Baylor. Starting running back Penny Boone, all MAC guy, ends up going to Louisville in the portal, now switched to UCF. But, those guys should not have been at Toledo. Those guys are guys that could have made impacts at the Big Ten level. And so those are the kind of guys that I think Illinois can now be a factor on. There's plenty of good players to go around in this state.
It was AJ Dennis was such a good get for Illinois. It doesn't last very long. Just what were your thoughts about him leaving, going to Michigan State after just one semester here, Al?
Yeah. So first, I mean, on the positive end of that, I do think that the impact of having gotten him can still be that can still give you some momentum in the state of Michigan. And when you talk to some of the guys in the state still, like a Darren Stry, they bring up AJ Dennis or so it almost, Illinois got some pub off of that in the state. Like, man, this is a big recruit in this state who chose to go to Illinois. I think that still can be a positive impact. As far as him, leaving, I thought it was a little bit odd the first time around in that recruitment, how quickly he kind of moved through it. Didn't really give the new Michigan State staff a chance to recruit him. I thought he would give them a little bit more of an opportunity. Now, he had been recruited by Illinois for a long time and felt really comfortable there, liked the academics. And so I understand just kind of and he had visited Clemson and some other schools. So I think he felt like this is the right point for me to make this decision. But I always wondered what would have happened if he had held that out a little bit longer and let Jonathan Smith and his stuff, because he was committed to Michigan State for a long time, was very, set on going there. And then the coaching change happened. So I guess I'm a tad surprised that it happened this soon, but I'm not necessarily all that surprised that he ended up back at Michigan State. And so, for Illinois, I think losing a guy back to his home state school where he was committed, there are worse losses on the recruiting trail, but certainly I think he was a guy who was going to be an impact player for Illinois. So not going to sugarcoat that he was a loss.
Yeah, no, really talented kid. Illinois currently has 5 commitments in the class of 2025 so far. It feels like a solid foundation. What do you think so far of the class they've put together with a couple in-staters, Carson Boyd, in-state kid that plays in St. Louis at quarterback, and a couple offensive linemen? What do you think of what they've started so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a continuous build of what they've done in the Midwest. And it's funny, every time we talk Illinois, I have to remind myself and people listening that it wasn't that long ago that you and I were talking about, like, are they going to recruit anybody from in the state, or are they going to, recruit the Midwest much anymore?
I barely had a reason to bring you on here, Alan.
I know. It's almost like we've forgotten that, right? Like, that's not a talking point anymore. And so, and they've built such good inroads in the state, which they had to do some repair work there.
Oh, yeah.
And that's not easy to do. And I think that they did it. And then the relationships that they have in St. Louis, and obviously I think we mentioned Corey Patterson. He was a piece of that, but the fact that he's not on staff anymore and they're still able to bring in guys like Carson Boyd, I guess he's an in-state recruit, but he's really a St. Louis guy. So I think that that's having just watched him throw, I think you love when you take a guy early and then he goes out and validates you by winning these awards that he's gotten to. So I really like that pickup. I think they've done a good job of, we mentioned the state of Wisconsin. They've been able to go up there and pick up some guys. And Griffin Rousseau, I think, is a guy who can be a really good piece for them. Bart Miller's developed similar type offensive linemen. And so I think he fits into what they do. I think Michael McDonough is a little bit of he's the sleeper in the group. He committed so early, not a lot of fanfare. What didn't have a ton of other offers, but I think you put the tape on, and I think that's a really, really good early eval and take there. Then Andre Lovett, obviously a guy who's had a chance to, he had an opportunity to take the recruiting process out further, had a lot of different offers. Certainly could have been a guy who we would be talking about right now as somebody who would be taking official visits in the month of June. So to get him in early, a defensive back with some length and some versatility, I think he's a really good pickup also.
I want to bring up the quarterback again, Carson Boyd. What do you make of him? What do you think he's going to bring to a program? Obviously, gets a couple years to develop, like with Trey Petty, who's coming in here, but it does feel like they're kind of upping the talent level at that quarterback position.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, he's a clear arm talent. You don't go and win awards, MVP awards at these kind of off-season camps without being able to throw the football. That's almost purely what you're being judged on, is just how do you throw the ball on air. And so he's got the arm talent, but he's won at the prep level, obviously won a lot of games. And I think you like a guy who's played in pressure situations, played deep into the season, played in championship games, played in key playoff games, and a guy who comes out on top on those. So you have some pedigree there as well. His dad played at the college level. His older brother plays at the college level. So he's been around football. Has been around a really good program. I think the only thing that he really lacks is prototypical height. Mm-hmm. And if he had that, he would have been, he probably would have had double the offer list that he has. But I think in terms of his athleticism, his ability to throw the ball on the move, and then that kind of intangible of having played in pressure situations and won a lot of games, I think he's certainly a guy that you expect to come in and be able to eventually compete for the job and win some games at Illinois also.
I think this will be a smaller class for Illinois, maybe like 15 to 18, somewhere in there. But this is a huge month of June ahead, as they have 5 already. You'd like to get several more on board, and they've done a pretty good job here on official visits. So they're starting to get some guys locked down for these officials. Alan, is there any guys in particular that we want to highlight? Because I thought Michael McDonough, Andre Lovett, those are kind of litmus test recruits for me. Like, Illinois needs to start landing those guys. Is there anybody on the board here that you think are more those litmus test guys that Illinois needs to try and lock up over the next month?
Yeah, so litmus test, I would, I think it's great that they're going to get Jaquan Stubbs on campus. I really, really like him. Kind of a basketball power forward that didn't quite get the basketball offers, but has huge upside in football. It sounds like Keith Randolph. And I think you can show him that. Like, this is what we did with him. And I think they have very similar profiles. I think Wisconsin and Purdue are also very in that recruitment. And so if you talk about a litmus test, it's like, can you beat those programs on a guy from Ohio? And I think they can. He said even getting an official, I think, is a win. Illinois was not a school I necessarily had pegged as like Stubbs is definitely going to take an official to Illinois. So I think they're having some impact there. Braden Trimble is another one. I mean, it feels like Illinois should be able to get him. Now he's picking up some other offers and some schools are coming in. And so that's another, I think, good litmus test of a guy, you in very early, kind of built an early lead. Can you hang on to that? Looking at some of the other guys that are coming in, Cameron Brooks, another one. It's like, feels like Illinois should be able to get that one. But now Iowa just offered. He's, got officials with Kansas and Kansas State. Those are tough schools to beat on Midwest kids, but very winnable recruitment for Illinois. CJ Bass, East St. Louis guy, program that you have some good ties to. That's another one that, again, just seems like you're in striking distance. So that's just like 4 guys rattled off the top of my head. Let's say you can get 2 or 3, or maybe all 4 of those. That's a really, really good month of June right there. I don't think it's out of the question that you and I would sit here at the end of June going into July and say, man, that was a good month for them. They landed several of those guys that we previewed.
Yeah. Where do you think they sit with Darren Stry? Close to a top 500 prospect out of Michigan. You mentioned AJ Dennis might have piqued his interest. I don't know if it hurts him that AJ Dennis goes elsewhere, but it seems like Illinois is at least a major player in there after hosting him for an official.
Yeah, I do think they're a major player. And I do think that he had a really good visit, really likes the program. And another kid, he kind of reminds me of Andrew Dennis in a way of how he goes about his recruitment. He's a very academic kid. It's kind of a small town, rural school in Michigan. He's not in a major city. He's not in Detroit. And so there's a similar feel to that. I think Illinois can get in on him. I think Illinois can win out in that recruitment. It's going to be interesting, though. He's going to take all of his visits. I think Wisconsin offering and them being a program that has some lineman tradition, they're going to be a tough school to beat. He's talking about Stanford and other schools like that. So there's a lot to be determined there. I think if I had to say right now, is he leaning anywhere? I have not picked up from him that he has his mind made up at all or is close to it. I think he really wants to finish out those officials. And I know a lot of kids say that, but usually you can kind of see through it and know, well, they're really leaning towards this school or that school. With him, I don't really get the impression that he's got one that he's leaning towards yet. So I do think Illinois getting in first was great. Now, again, it's just, I mentioned hanging on. You have to make sure that the memory of that official doesn't get kind of hidden underneath these next few visits that he's going to take.
All right, just to zoom out before I let you go, Allen, 4th year we're entering of Brett Bielema. What do you think of this program? What is your perception of the program now compared to when he took over? How do you feel like this is all going so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going very well. I mean, I just 4 years ago, certainly 5-6 years ago before he got there, I don't think we're sitting here and you're asking me about Darren Stry,
right?
Or a player, a prospect of that caliber. We're certainly not talking about them having gotten Andrew Dennis and lost him. I don't think we're talking about them being in on a Jaquan Stubbs. And so I think just the caliber of the recruit that we just talked about and some of the schools they're competing with for such guys, the emphasis on the in-state recruits. We certainly wouldn't have been talking about Braden Trimble, I don't think, at that time, right? And so I think they've done a really, really good job. I think you've seen some of that translate onto the field. I think you've seen some of that translate into April in the NFL draft, which I think is a huge part of recruiting. And I think you're seeing things start to continue to build. It wasn't going to be an overnight process. It wasn't going to be a 2-year process, a 3-year process. But I think, from the first few recruits they were in on, I think Joey Okla was probably one of the first, right? Mm-hmm. And then, just to see the foundation of that, of taking a Midwest kid, a Wisconsin guy, and now seeing how that's kind of expanded itself within the region, I think they've done a really, really good job recruiting. And it goes back to what I said before about building relationships and even having to repair relationships and sort of, I think, rethink the brand of how Illinois is looked at in the state and in the Midwest. Not an easy thing to do. And I think they've accomplished that.
I feel like Brett Bielema has gone from A to B, right? They are competitive, whether it's in recruiting and on the field. Now it's just about the next step is winning more on the field, winning more big time recruitments, right? But I agree with you. Like, there was so much to repair and to rebuild that I feel like they have taken steps. they haven't quite arrived yet, of course, here, Alan. Like, and that's, it usually takes more time with football than it does with a lot of other programs, especially in a program like this.
Yeah, and I think you just have to, again, assess, not have we gotten there, but are we moving towards it? And I think they've continued to move towards the goal and build, and they're being given the opportunity to do that. And I think it's been, I think there has to be patience on the end of administration and fans, but along with that patience, you have to earn that patience through progress. And I think that they've shown enough progress to have earned the right for people to say, like, we're going in the right direction. Let's give them just a little bit more time here.
Allen Trieu, 24/7 Sports national recruiting analyst. You can follow him on Twitter at Allen Trieu. Alan, you're the goods man. We always appreciate the insight.
Yeah, happy to do so. And hopefully you and I both make it to July with everything intact.
Yeah, marriage and kids still loving us. So we'll figure that out. Alan, thanks, man.
Yeah, take care.